Good afternoon and welcome for the first time in 2024 to the Hibs Observer afternoon briefing. Nearly said morning briefing there out of habit, but it's myself, Liam Bryce, here with Patrick McPartlin. We're very much in the depths of the winter break at the moment. No Scottish Premiership football to speak of at the moment, but that doesn't mean there aren't plenty of talking points flying around. Obviously, we are also in the depths of the January transfer window, which can be a stressful, frantic, and frustrating affair for fans, clubs, and just about everybody involved in football. But yeah, Hibs currently at the moment away on their mid-season training camp in Dubai. Nick Montgomery getting a chance to just kind of get all his players on the training pitch for a sustained period. And really try and drill home what he wants from them in the second half of the season. Patrick, we'll come first to, kind of the bit of news that came out of the training camp yesterday was that Hibs have, as was kind of expected, taken young Kanayo Meaga over to Dubai with them. As I'm sure you all know, Meaga has been on loan at Airdrie for the first half of the season and by all accounts, has really been a standout in the Championship. He's really, really impressed a lot of people. Been earning rave reviews, a couple of Player of the Month awards for Airdrie. And I think it's always quite telling, like a lone player's impact at a club. Never mind stats or anything else in between. You can always measure it by how sort of anxious the fans of the loan club get at the prospect of him being recalled from his loan early. And I think, apologies to Airdrie fans here, but I think that was very much the case for them. You could see it. It was quite evident on social media that how highly they rate him. It's not an official recall at this point, as we understand it, but he has been taken over to Dubai, so Nick Montgomery can get a closer look at him. Yeah, Patrick. Just in terms of that, it was kind of expected that would be the case, and it's a chance for him to impress the Hibs manager, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I know that one of the first rules of football is never to fall in love with a lone player, but I think a fair few Diamonds fans would be quite happy to break that particular rule. I think he's been really good for Airdrie at Championship level. Obviously, he had a loan spell last season towards the end of the campaign with Kelty Hearts in League One. He's made that step up to Airdrie in the Championship, and by all accounts is doing really well in what I think is probably one of the division's more kind of interesting teams. Not to sort of take anything away from the other 9 teams in the league, but this is a team that I think we're doing quite well. Maybe going under the radar a little bit in Scottish football as a whole. Sort of last season, but then coming up in the playoffs, obviously getting one over on Hamilton to get promoted, and then they've had some good results, most notably against Wraith Rovers last weekend, which Kanayo played his part in. And I think that there's a lot of appreciation for what Rhys McCabe is doing at the club. Really, really sort of trusting in young players to go out and really kind of perform for the club, giving them that platform to go on and kind of progress. And it's really not held the club back. I think they're more than holding their own in the Championship. And not just Kanayo, you've also had Josh O'Connor's there as well on loan. Murray Aiken, another Hibs youngster, who's there, although still in the midst of injury recovery after he picked up quite a nasty ankle injury, I think it was, a few weeks back. But I think I've been watching Kanayo since he sort of first came to Hibs a couple of years back, and the progression, the development, not just in terms of his sort of technical ability, but just physically and mentally, has just been like really quite astonishing. And I think he's quite a quiet guy. He's not one of these, he's not sort of all over social media. There's not this sort of, he's obviously not been brought up as a boyhood Hibs fan. So there's not this huge kind of fanfare about him in the same way that there might have been previously about the likes of, Ethan Laidlaw, someone like that, even Josh O'Connor. And I think as well, because he's not a striker, he's not sort of scoring loads of goals for the reserve team, the under 18s previously. There is maybe that little bit kind of under the radar nature, but I think anytime I've seen him, I've been really impressed by the way he plays football, his ability, his sort of just his vision and everything. Even he's still 19, not 20 until March. But it does feel like quite a significant kind of opportunity for him, because obviously you look at Hibs at the moment, they've not got a great deal in the right back position, with Lewis Miller being away at the Asian Cup. Chris Cadden, of course, is still coming back from injury, and as you said in your piece earlier this week, which I'm sure you'll elaborate on, there's a very good chance that he might not be viewed as a long-term option at right back by Nick Montgomery. And beyond that, you've got sort of Rory Whittaker, who's 16, still in his sort of first sort of experience of senior football. And if Canayo does well in this training camp and maybe proves to Montgomery that he can offer something for the rest of the season for Hibs, then I don't think you would have any problems in completing the official recall and pitching him into action. But at the same time, if it's felt that he needs a bit more time just playing regular games at Airdrie, then I don't think it's not necessarily a negative. I don't think it's it shouldn't be looked upon as a failure if Hibs decide actually you'll benefit more from getting another half a season with Airdrie, and then we'll revisit things in the summer. Because he has had limited senior football, just in his career, full stop, not just in the last couple of seasons. And I think the way that Montgomery sort of puts players, the way he sort of deals with it, the sort of person first and then the footballer second, I don't think he would want to risk stunting somebody's development. And it'd be very easy to say that Hibs should recall him because he's been playing well for Airdrie, but if they decide that, having seen him during this training camp, he's not quite ready, then potentially if he goes back to Airdrie, then in the summer they get a player who's even more developed and even more kind of ready for the rigors of sort of regular senior football at Hibs.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's obviously a delicate balance to be struck with these situations, because it's sort of, that balance is obviously between perhaps maybe a potentially short-term need in the squad to cover what are obviously some quite big gaps with guys out injured, guys away on international duty. So I mean, you're week to week as giving yourself the best chance of winning football games. But then you obviously you balance that against the fact that this is still a 19-year-old kid, very very little, as well as he's done, very little senior football experience, and it's just whether recalling him back and pitching him into the Hibs first team at this point in time is really the best thing for him, because he's obviously settled so well at Airdrie. He's impressing a lot of people. He's playing in a side that is suited to him, and obviously you wrote that in your when you spoke to Eddie May last week, and saying that it was a very deliberate choice to send a player like Meaga to Airdrie because of the style of football they play. I think if anybody's even sort of briefly watched them, they do like to they build out from the back. Everything's very sort of measured, short passes, trying to build up the pitch, and it seems to have been a really good fit all round. So I mean, I wouldn't like to be the one making the call if Meaga goes out there and he blows everybody away with his performances in training and the bounce games. And you might think it becomes an easy decision, but it's after a few weeks. Hibs are going to have Lewis Miller back. They will have Chris Cadden back, who can obviously play in that right back position, and it's going to come down to a judgment call, I think, on whether Meaga was going to get enough football in the second half of the season to justify breaking up what is obviously a very productive sort of a productive move for him, at the moment, and whether he'd be better served seeing that out to the end of the season. And then, as you say, Hibs might re-inherit an even better, an even more rounded footballer. You just don't, not kind of sure what way that's going to go right at this moment in time. It might, become apparent to the coaching team that this kid's too good not to be in our side. He might go over and impress that much. But it'll be interesting, certainly, to see how it pans out, because it's obviously there's been a lot of interest taken in them by Hibs fans. That's probably fueled obviously by maybe getting a glimpse of his performances, and then obviously the obvious excitement around him by Airdrie fans. And I think, I'm not going to try and pull the wool over anybody's eyes and say I've watched lots of Airdrie this season, but I have seen the odd game. They've been on the telly a few times. I've looked at specific clips of Meaga, and he has been impressive. You can see why people are excited about him. He's he's physically impressive. He's comfortable on the ball. He seems very suited to that style of play. What struck me as well was how good he was at passing the ball forward. Is what stuck out for me. A kind of young kid playing at right back in a kind of physical league at the Championship, where as soon as you get the ball, you're going to have somebody coming right on top of you. You would almost forgive a kid of that age for playing quite conservatively. He gets the ball at right back. What does he do? He'll just pop it back into the centre back, recycle it. But he does, even under pressure, he is good at getting his head up and playing forward passes, which is obviously is kind of how important fullbacks have become, not just to defending in the modern game, but attacking. There's the game's completely changed, and there's been a big shift towards fullbacks who can do a lot going forward. So it certainly bodes well for him in that sense. By all accounts, I heard that he had a really good game up against Dylan Easton, against Wraith Rovers. Easton is a lot of people's shout for player of the season so far in the Championship. So to be able to step up against something like that and cope against him is obviously impressive. Airdrie, I think it's just one goal they've conceded in the last 3 or 4 games. They've been keeping clean sheets. So again, it's a player who's obviously clearly doing very well, and it just comes down to whether they feel that it's the right time to recall him. And I think Nick Montgomery touched on that. He was asked directly about loan players in one of his press conferences before Christmas, and he was saying, in the case of some players, there isn't an option to recall them. Obviously, Meaga, it doesn't appear to be one of them. That option might be on the table. But he made it quite clear in the same way that he was saying, I'm not going to sign players just to come in and, take up spaces on the bench. He said, I'm not going to bring boys back from loan deals if it's not going to be in theirs and the club's best interest. So he's not going to, jump into a decision on him. But I'm not sure what, side of the coin it's going to land on at the moment. But I'm sure we'll see in the coming days. Just to, kind of talk a bit further about the training camp, he'll have joined that, but he's not the only one. As we, there's plenty of guys who have been out injured for months on end. Obviously, we saw Harry McCurdy come back onto the pitch against Motherwell in the last game before the winter break. We've seen, pictures coming out of the training camp. You've got Chris Cadden in there, who we touched on, Jake Doyle-Hayes as well, and also Adam Lafondra. I saw him sneaking about in the background of a couple of pictures. He seems to be on his way back as well. So it must be a welcome boost to have these guys back in and around it. Guys who have, obviously, they're all good players, but guys that have been out as well. It brings a kind of injection of fresh energy, enthusiasm into it. And obviously, seeing these guys come back, there'll be other boys thinking, well, I really need to, nail down my place now. So it must be a really welcome relief, I think, for Montgomery in particular, who's, he's made no bones about the fact that his squad has been pretty threadbare. He's working with what he's got. So to get these guys in and around it again must be a real relief for him.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly. I don't think it was a kind of throwaway comment when he was talking about some of these players, some who obviously haven't even played under him yet, such has been the extent of their injuries, but describing them as being almost like new signings. And yes, it sounds like a bit of a manager cliche. We hear it a lot, but there is actually some merit in what he's saying. That I've always felt, and I wrote a piece about this, that Jake Doyle-Hayes, when fit and fully firing, would be a really good option for Hibs, particularly in Montgomery's 4-4-2 and how he sort of utilises the midfielders. That you would need somebody with that kind of box-to-box energy. With an engine that can keep going for sort of like 75, 80 minutes, and then you can think about, replacing them with somebody from the bench. And, so I think Doyle-Hayes would be a good fit for this setup. I think that, I think Chris Cadden would be a really good fit as well, whether that's at right back, whether it's, as an option on the sort of like right midfield, right wing, whatever you want to call it. Let's not get into debate about Montgomery's formation preferences, but also just Adam Le Fondre as well. I think if there's been one topic that's united the Hibs fans in recent weeks, it's been sort of how kind of starved of service and chances Dylan Vente's been. And I just think if it wasn't obvious at the time, I think that Le Fondre's absence has kind of hammered home just how well those two kind of linked up and the kind of partnership that they sort of formed in sort of brief time together on the pitch before Le Fondre's injury. And I think that it's, you look at players and a lot of focus is put on, can this player come back in and can he make a difference to the team? And everyone sort of looks at it from a point of view of, this individual player coming back and scoring like 5 goals or, getting 5 assists or whatever. But it could actually just be that by having certain players back, it brings out the best in 2 or 3 other players as well. So it's not just about having bodies back and having to not rely on 16 and 17-year-olds to fill your bench. It's about having players back who can bring out the best in their teammates as well as adding something themselves to the team. And on top of that, you've got, we talk about the likes of Josh Landers, Rory Whittaker, Rudy Molotnikov, Dean Cleland, who was on the bench against Motherwell. And, there's been other players who've been training with the first team. And I think that having more bodies available will probably encourage, the youngsters to work harder because they think there's a chance for me here if I sort of put in the effort, if I put in the time on the training ground, then they know that Montgomery's going to include them in the squad. They know that there's going to be possibility of game time, and just because they're up against seasoned professionals who've maybe played hundreds of games at a top level, somebody like Le Fondre, somebody like Doyle Hayes, it's not as if these players come back and then that's it. Like I think it's probably a good sign for the 3 of them. The Landers, Whittaker, and Molotnikov are all in Dubai. I think that's, Montgomery has spoken about this. He said that he doesn't want to block their pathway, and they're quite, the club's quite hopeful that those 3 in particular have, quite bright futures. And I think that taking them to Dubai not only shows this sort of, trust in their ability and, the fact that they feel they can contribute between now and the end of the season, but also just that, for them, I think Molotnikov was certainly on the sort of Spanish pre-season training camp as well, as was Meaga, more to the point. But I just think it's, you bring, in the footballing sense, kids on a trip like that and they get a chance to see what it's like, on that kind of trip when they're sort of trusted to go with the senior squad. And that can have like a big impact as well. They sort of know what's expected of them. They're representing the club. And they get a taste of what it's like being sort of like a regularly involved in the senior squad, and just little things like that can make a big difference. So, good obviously to get players back in an individual sense and to have more kind of bodies available for games. But at the same time, it should help the team overall because you've got players with bags of experience who can fit positions that other players are maybe struggling to get. Have the same effect, and then it's just. I think it's just you would hope. I think if you were Nick Montgomery that this sort of layoff, this training camp, and time off from football can give some of these players a chance to really work on their fitness and really come back. We know he's not going to pitch them in before they're ready. I know there was a certain element of Harry McCurdy coming back, and that maybe being a little bit ahead of schedule purely because there was no one else. And I don't think Montgomery's the kind of man who would. Like to make a habit of that, but it's certainly going to be a good thing if they can work on their fitness in Dubai, and then when they come back, they can organise further bounce games, reserve games, and just sort of slowly bring them, or not slowly, but bring them back to being able to compete in first team games and hopefully making an impact in the first team.
Yeah, definitely. I think as exciting it is for fans to see these guys, coming back into the fold. I think he's been quite consistent with that. Nick Montgomery, the amount of times he's been asked after games as to why, maybe player X, Y, or Z didn't feature, it was slight up, but we didn't want to risk him. He's kind of not the man to take chances on that. Just through the names that you mentioned there, I just wanted to maybe just touch on Jake Doyle Hayes briefly because, I think of all the players who have, been working their way back to fitness, I feel like he's maybe potentially, people might disagree with me, but maybe had the least, attention, the least sort of talked about. I find, obviously Guys like Cadden coming back to add more in attacking areas, Lafondra, Harry McCurdy as well. But I think Doyle Hayes coming back it could be one that is the most quietly effective. I think because obviously, we've seen it in games that midfield two. It really sort of requires your two players to do it an awful lot, and I think for Doyle Hayes, I think that could potentially suit him as being quite a well-rounded midfielder rather than, I think you hear a lot of people talking now, about how many players now are specialists in, sort of certain areas and certain things. But I think to really make the 4-4-2 work, there could be an argument that in that midfield, you need somebody who is a really good all-rounder, who can do a bit of everything. Obviously, you look at Joe Newell and he's the kind of man at the moment who, bears a lot of the responsibility, kind of takes charge of games or tries to take charge of games, in the middle of the park. So if somebody else in there is an option with that kind of well-rounded skill set, I think it could make a real difference. And as you say, it's about making the team, it's not just about individuals, but perhaps trying to make the team more than the sum of its parts by guys who we've seen worked well together in the past and who can hopefully then, bring the best out of each other. But just to move it on a bit, it's not all about, players coming back from injury this month. We do expect that there will be some movement in the transfer market. I don't think anybody's under any illusions that Hibs are going to do, every bit of business that needs required in the squad at this moment of time. It's going to be a bit of a longer term process probably to get it to where Nick Montgomery wants it to be. But obviously we can look at what's available at the moment and we can, look at areas that have been strong and look at areas that have been maybe not so strong. So if you cast your eye over the squad at the moment, Patrick, what are the areas that are sticking out to you as needing some new faces to come in and help?
I think the obvious one would be central defence. I think that's been the case for a number of seasons now. I think Hibs have probably been lucky in one sense and perhaps quite kind of risky in another, that they've been able to rely on someone like Paul Hanlon for the past, however many seasons, and, put somebody alongside him and get, what is a fairly decent centre-half pairing, whether it, Hanlon and Porteous, Hanlon and Fish. Obviously this season we've seen more of it. It's mostly been kind of Rocky Bashiri and Will Fish. And, I think I would argue that both of them have played well at times. I think that, there has been the occasion where, Rocky has made a mistake. There's been occasions where Will Fish's made mistakes. You have to remember they are both still relatively young for centre halves. Will Fish obviously 20, Rocky I think has just turned 24 quite recently. And obviously it's not ideal that you've got somebody like Rocky playing on the left side of defence when he's sort of naturally right-footed. And I think I don't really think, I think one of the problems that Nick Montgomery has is that he doesn't have an obvious kind of starting centre-back pairing, because we've seen this, that sometimes it's Fish and Bashiri, sometimes it's Fish and Hanlon. What he seems kind of 100% on is that, Will Fish needs to be in there as one of the two. And I think that, that obviously says a lot for Fish and how he's sort of progressed on, his form from last season. I think at times this season he's been really, really effective. I think he's looked really good. That sort of like coming out from defence, sort of building from the back. He's obviously an aerial threat from set pieces, and that's something that we saw last season too. But I think obviously the links with Chris Moore at Leeds, who can play centre half and right back. Kanayo Meg was another person who can also play centre half. Played centre half quite a lot for the under 18s, as well as playing at right back. And to me it would be very surprising if Hibs didn't do anything with the centre of defence in this window. Whether that's just having another option. You look at Riley Harbottle, who I think is the only, I think we've said this before, but the only kind of senior player at Hibs who's not had any game time since Montgomery came in. Now, not every player is going to be suited to the way that Montgomery wants to play. and obviously the coaching staff have looked at him and just thought he's not sort of able to maybe play the way that we want him to, and the way that we want the team to play. And I think that, again, we talk about Montgomery's man management and things like that, and I think it's probably doing the player a favour, thinking like, we're not going to pitch you into this because we know you're not ready for it. You're not going to you're not going to be able to contribute, and they're kind of saving him from potentially struggling, and just in terms of what that could do to a player's career, to their the psychological aspect of it, the emotional aspect, and things like that. And it looks like he's going to be heading out on loan. There has been interest in him from I think teams in England, and I think it would be probably quite surprising if he didn't head out on loan this month. And so that that leaves you with sort of three really first team centre backs in Bashiri, Fish, and Hanlon. And I think Lee Johnson used to say, and kind of agree with this to a certain extent, that you really need kind of four centre halves in a senior squad who are all capable of kind of starting games. And I think he's probably right there. I think that you need to have players who can step up. If somebody is injured, then they need to be able to come in, and for it not to kind of disrupt the team, how they play. And at the moment, I'm not sure they have that. I think you can see that there've been times when Montgomery's taken off Bashiri and put Hanlon on, or vice versa, and I think it does sort of disrupt the team a little bit. And I think that's something that we'll be looking to try and limit in the second half of the season. And the other thing as well, I mean, it's very straightforward, but you look at how many goals Hibs have conceded this season. Now, I know obviously that they conceded quite a few at the start of the season before Montgomery came in. There's been, they've let in 4 at Celtic, 4 at Rangers, but the only 2 teams who've conceded more goals than Hibs at this moment in time are Livingston and Motherwell, who I think it would be fair to say are not having the best seasons in their recent histories. And, I think obviously you can look at the defence and say, the defence needs work. But, you talk about defending as a team. So I think, centre-back is the obvious one for me. It's not maybe the most kind of exciting aspect, I think, of transfers. I think, oh yeah, bringing in centre-backs. Could maybe also an argument for midfield. If Josh Campbell's going to be out for a while, I know he hasn't been playing as one of the midfield too, but even depending on when Jake Doyle-Hayes comes back, you've got Jimmy Jeggle, Dylan Levitt, Joe Newell, and that's it. And I would argue you probably need someone in there as well, just to kind of mix things up, to give Montgomery options. You were talking about a kind of all-round midfielder, and I think that's probably true. I think Dylan Levitt's maybe yet to show like why Hibs were so keen to bring him in the summer. I mean, we talk about Joe Newell a lot and how impressive he's been. I think I would probably want to see more from Dylan Levitt. And I think certainly with Jimmy Jeggo, I mean, he does a job. I thought he did very well with Joe Newell at the start of the season, at the start of Montgomery's tenure, when they were kind of the preferred pairing. But I think it's painfully obvious at times that the way that Montgomery plays, and people are actually commenting and saying this, that you do need a kind of box-to-box midfielder. You need someone with that sort of energy, who can just get up and down the park, who can maybe contribute with, a few goals, but also get back and sort of muck in, help the defence. And it's just that sort of it's the spine of the team really. And at the moment, it could be stronger. And I think that there's an argument to be made for bringing in someone in midfield. There's an argument to be made for bringing in somebody at centre back, and I think the team, or rather the club, are quite keen on adding to their wide options as well. I think a winger has been on the cards for quite a while as a position they'd like to strengthen. But we're told regularly by by managers, not just Nick Montgomery, but other teams, other divisions, that January is a very difficult month to make signings. And the way things are going, I don't think there's going to be a horde of Bournemouth players heading north to kind of cut their teeth in senior football with Hibs. So that's why maybe it makes sense for Hibs to be looking at loans, to be looking at sort of short-term fixes ahead of what would potentially be a bigger rebuilding job in the summer. But I mean, I go back to what I was saying before. You've got players coming back from injury, and they could make a big difference to the rest of the team. it could be that one or two players can come in, and that can make a difference. You look at last season, Jeggo came in January, Seiji Egan Riley came in January, and the two of them, probably contributed to Hibs having if not a strong second half to the season, certainly a much more improved sort of second half. And I imagine that Montgomery will be looking to do that again. Somebody with the contacts that Brian McDermott has, even though it's a difficult time to bring in players, you'd imagine there's maybe one or two gems out there, and you would probably trust between them that they'd be able to identify players who could at least do a job in the short term, and whether that's with a view to potentially keeping those players on longer, or whether it's just to kind of do a job for the sort of next 6 months. One way or another, you think there's probably players out there who can come in and make a difference to this team individually and collectively.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky window, and January is always sort of tricky. But I think this one in particular for Hibs is again, it's like coming back to the the individual situation with Meaga. It's kind of balancing the long term against this short term need. But yeah, I think I would agree in terms of the positions that need strengthened. Obviously, I mean, I know I was talking earlier on about a box to box midfielder as if those are really as if they grow on trees. I think it's a particularly hard profile of player to come by nowadays, but I do think it's certainly something that Hibs would benefit from, as well as the other positions you've addressed there. Maybe somebody in the wide areas, and almost certainly defensive cover. It sort of doesn't really even need mention so much anymore that's required. But yeah, I think we'll leave it there for today. I'm sure we'll be back again over the next few days, hopefully with some more transfer news to discuss. And I've no doubt there'll be different bits and pieces coming out of the training camp over in Dubai, and it's all about us, I think keeping an eye on signings and counting down to the return of football, because it's just not the same without it, unfortunately. But thanks for joining us anyway. As I said, we'll be back again over the next few days to bring you all the latest from Easter Road. Cheers.